Hi, this morning I was watching a show on the website Mind Body Green, and it was like a debate between 3 different doctors about what the best diet is. So it was between the doctors Frank Lipman, Mark Hyman and Joel Kahn. So Frank Lipman is a proponent of the low-carb, high-fat diet, and Mark Hyman is like a vegan paleo. He calls himself a pegan. And Joel Kahn is vegan, low-fat vegan. So it was pretty interesting to hear them all talk. It was about 30 minutes of them talking, and they had an audience as well. I'll put the link to that show in the description box if you want to check it out. But this is just a summary of what they said and a few of my thoughts on it as well. So the show started off with Frank Lipman saying, "I love fats," and that we've been brainwashed to think that fats clog our arteries and that they make us fat. So he presented a little bit of his case of like how he's seen patients who lower carbs and up the fat intake and cut out the processed foods, and they actually improve their health. So he says that he's not against coconut oil, avocado, grass-fed beef and grass-fed butter. And one of the reasons that this works well for him and his patients is because generally when people up their fat intake, they lower their carbohydrate intake. And I think the carbs that he's talking about that could be problematic are those processed carbs, like the ones that aren't so much in their whole food form. But at the same time, later on in the show, he also said that he once tried a low-fat, high carbohydrate diet where he ate a lot of fruit and grains and beans, and he thought he was doing something healthy, but he found that he was getting pre-diabetic from it. So he brings up the topic of insulin resistance and carbohydrate intolerance, and how a lot of people who are unhealthy have these issues. So putting them on a high carbohydrate diet can actually cause problems rather than solve them. So that was his point of view, and I'll talk about what the other 2 said. So Mark Hyman, who is like vegan but paleo as well. So I guess he's not really 80-10-10 style vegan. He's more like the high-fat vegan. And he said that the most important thing with diet is not necessarily whether you're vegan or omnivore, but the quality of the food that you're eating. So, for example, the dairy that we eat now and the meat, well, not that we eat that, but other people eat, the meat that people eat, the dairy that most people drink in the Western world is processed, and it's far removed from what people would have drunk or eaten many years ago, and that cows are hybridized, and there's just a lot of processing that goes into making meat and dairy nowadays, and of course factory farming, which is very cruel, and I don't believe anyone who really knows about it actually supports it. Even paleo people, generally I don't think they support factory farming. So he was saying that it's more about the quality of the food that we eat that is important, not necessarily whether we are getting this ratio of more carbs or more fats. It's about the quality of the food. And then Joel Kahn, who is the vegan, the low-fat vegan in this group of 3 people, he was more talking about the science behind it and saying that he tends to believe the science about the matter, that people like Dr. Esselstyn, Nathan Pritikin and Dean Ornish, they have done the research, and there's a lot of vegan research that has found that a low-fat, plant-based diet reverses heart disease and prevents heart disease, which is the #1 killer in the Western world. And his take was that maybe we can include healthy saturated fats, or have a higher fat intake, but that could be at the cost of clogging our arteries, and it could be at the cost of raising your risk of getting heart disease. And this was a conversation that went on. So that was how it started off, and then the doctors started talking more about other things like gluten, whether it's should be part of your diet or whether we should eliminate it. They talked about dairy and also added sugar. And one of the things that they said about sugar was, Mark Hyman actually says that added sugar is okay once in a while, whereas the other two, even the vegan doctor Joel Kahn, he said best to not include added sugar in your diet. So I think, like, with me and my viewers, most of us would eat added sugar because we add it to whole foods, and I personally don't have a problem with adding sugar to whole foods. For example, if you're having oats in the morning and you add brown sugar, I don't think that's really that harmful. I actually think that's healthier than eating bacon and eggs or eating an animal-based meal. So I think added sugar is not really as harmful as we think. It's just that so many of the processed foods that are available on the shelf nowadays, they do have added sugar. And it's not necessarily that the sugar in them is bad, it's just that most of these processed foods don't have much fiber in them. They lack antioxidants that are in whole foods like fruits and vegetables. So to say that sugar is the problem is a bit exaggerated. And they also talked about, well, I'll just summarize their conclusion. So at the end of the whole debate, each doctor was asked what is some advice that you would give in like a few sentences to people who want to improve their health. And the main thing that they all agreed on was to eliminate the processed food and just stay as close to nature as possible. So yeah, as I said before, some of the food that we eat now isn't the same as what it was many years ago. So for most people, that would include eliminating meat and dairy, and also to eat foods that are high in phytonutrients, and to eliminate added sugar if possible. Also to not have caffeine. Even with the paleo guy, Frank Lipman, he was saying caffeine is a drug, and he's seen patients who get off the caffeine and they actually have better energy afterwards once they get over the addiction. So it's not true that the paleo crowd is all pro caffeine. This guy who was on the show, Frank, he says that caffeine is a drug, and we like drugs, but better to take that out of the diet. Yeah, so I found that interesting that he wasn't pro caffeine, and I also think it was interesting how Joel Kahn, who was the vegan who was promoting more 80-10-10 style with the carbohydrates 80% and the fats and protein less than 10% of calories, that he was more pointing towards the science of it. And he is a cardiologist as well, and he has seen into the hearts of about 15,000 people. So he comes from that point of view where he has seen improvement in patients who eliminate the fat from their diet. Well, not eliminate, but minimize it to less than 10% of calories, and going plant-based, like that has been something that has worked for his patients. And he also pressed the idea of, like, if you're over 50, you should get your arteries checked, and that you should really keep up with what's happening with your body and make sure that your diet is working for you, whatever it is. Another interesting thing with Joel Kahn, who was the vegan cardiologist, is that he said that he's got a son who is paleo and is actually very healthy, and his son had tried other diets before. So it could be a genetic thing where there might be people who do better on certain diets just because of individual differences. I mean, I know that we are all humans, and I think in an ideal world, if we come from a place where we haven't abused our health in the past, we should be able to eat like the Okinawans, who eat high carbohydrate, low fat, low protein. Their staple is sweet potatoes and rice, and they are the longest lived society. And you would think that getting people from a standard American diet onto a diet like the Okinawans would be like ideal, and I think personally it is ideal, and it's probably the best way long term. But there might be nuances as to how to transition from a standard diet toward a high carbohydrate vegan diet. And that issue of insulin resistance that was brought up by Frank Lipman, who says that for a lot of people, going onto the paleo diet might be more beneficial than going straight to vegan. He might have a point, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't eliminate animal products or animal foods. Like, I think we should, for our health and the environment and the animals. Like, one of the points brought up by Joel Kahn was that it's not just our health that we have to consider when going vegan and what's on our plate. It's also about how it affects the planet and our environment and the animals. Even if you went paleo, it doesn't have to be animal based. You could be vegan paleo, like Mark Hyman is. Personally, I don't want to be vegan paleo because that would mean that I can't really eat as much carbohydrates as I want, and I might have to watch my weight more and how much I eat. I find that with eating this way, high carb vegan, I'm able to eat as much fruit and potatoes and rice until I'm satisfied, and I maintain a pretty good body weight through that, and I feel good on this. So that's me personally, and I think a lot of people actually do transition quite well going from a standard diet to a whole foods plant-based diet, and there are thousands of testimonials of that happening. So I'm not really sure why Frank Lipman would say that it doesn't work. I think maybe he just hasn't really tried it, or he hasn't tried it with enough people. So I mean, I can't argue with his own experience with himself going like high carbohydrate and it not working for him. There could be those various factors involved, like the insulin resistance and the carbohydrate intolerance. So anyway, if you know anything about that, carbohydrate intolerance, like, have you heard of those terms? And insulin resistance, I think we know what that is. But what I take out of that is that there might be a period of transition with your body getting used to going from high fat to low fat and high carbohydrate. If you have any thoughts, just leave it in the comments, and I'd like to hear what you think about what each of the panels said. So if you get a chance, you can watch the whole video, or if that I've linked in the description, and if not, then just comment on my video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!